Okay. So good, Andrey. It's good for us to have a private conversation, and we had started talking about the basic practice. Now, as I had mentioned, the jhanas already existed before the time of the Buddha. He practiced those jhanas and came away from them and went into austerities because he considered jhanas a failure at what he wanted. And generally, the reason for that is because no matter how high into the jhanas they go, they're not established well in the jhanas. Okay, that for instance, a teenager can ride his bicycle around a race course, let us say a Formula One, not a round track, but the very complicated Formula One race course. He can drive his bicycle around that time and time again, but that's not the same thing as getting into a race car that goes 250 miles an hour and go around that curve 100 or 120 50 150 180 miles an hour the first time he does it, just because he's been around the block on his bicycle.
Mm, okay.
Okay. Now what that means is that the first jhana is the key, and that as soon as the Westerner gets the first jhana, if he does, he wants immediately to go to the second jhana. When we come out of the second jhana, the natural landing place is back into hindrances. At the time,
Mm,
the Buddha didn't know that. And so that's why he rejected the jhanas in the first place. He rejected the jhanas in the first place because after you come out of the jhana, you're back into your ordinary existence. Samatha alone doesn't work.
Dhammarato, sorry to interrupt. What about suttas like, I think it was, 1112 is Anapanasati, right? But with our descriptions in
118
the
is on
suttas,
the.
okay, so maybe it's 1112 that actually describe these sort of jhanic stages, and which of them are eight?
Actually, there's a number of. No, there are not eight.
Okay.
Specifically in the suttas. In 112, in 119, and in other suttas where the jhana states are actually described. Okay,
Hmm.
gosh, I've forgotten the point. Uh, that they're they're spelled
You're
out
saying that after the second jhana, we merge back
to hindrances.
into hindrances. Yes.
Right. So the correct way of practice is the first jhana, 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 etc., until we get the mind to where it can have unwholesome thoughts, or no, it has wholesome thought after wholesome thought, and doesn't often come back to unwholesome thoughts. Therefore, when you do go into the second jhana and then come back out of it, you go back to uh, the first jhana.
Hmm.
Think of it like this: is that the first jhana is an airport, it's a landing, okay? And you take off and you fly, you've got two choices. You're either going to come back and land at the airport, or you won't crash land that plane.
Hmm.
And 99.9% of the time, the, uh, the pilots crash land. They don't come back to the first jhana. They don't come back to the airport. All right, they don't come
Hmm.
back to the landing place.
I
All
understand.
right. Okay, this is actually a very clear example of what the Buddha meant by uh, the middle path. Okay, most people think the middle path is either abandoning life and going into a cave, or spending one's life in a brothel. Those are the two extremes of the middle path.
That's not very
But
middle,
what?
is it?
No, well, no, those are the extremes,
Yeah.
and that somewhere in the middle of that is the middle path, and that's a very Western mentality, because Westerners are really hung up on sex due to the let us say some of the mistakes of the Catholic Church way back when, and so Westerners are really overhung about sex. Sex is in everything. I mean, they have women's sports, right? But why can't the women's sports dress like the men's sports, for instance, in basketball?
Right.
No,
Right.
they put them in bikinis. They make them sexual objects even when they're doing pole vaulting or high jumping
Right.
or volleyball or running. They can't run in the kind of clothing that men wear. They run in sexy clothing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very apparent in the Western culture, and then coming to India and places like that where it's very different, and it's
Very different.
yeah. Yeah.
Right. Here's something very interesting about India. When the British came in, the British came into India in 1500s, 1600s and established the East India Company, right? And then bled India dry. But they didn't like it because the Indian women were wearing saris. They still wear saris, except that every Indian woman wears a sari plus some gear that they were forced to wear by the Brits. That's the halter bra,
Mm-hmm.
the midriff and up, that in the time of British invasion, the women went bare tit. They were not sexual objects. You look at all of the old Indian art, and all the women have their tits right out there because those tits are for babies to suck on. They're not for men to play with. They're not sexual objects. The sexual objectification of the breast came in Europe
Right.
as part of their sexual hang-up. So that's an interesting side point. So getting back to the point about the Western Buddhism is that they're always anxious and wanting and greedy and whatnot like that, and so they misunderstand the whole point about the jhanas and everything like that. But then after the Buddha tried all the jhanas, and then he tried the austerities. The Jains were doing that kind of stuff. And in fact, Mahavir, the beginner of the Jain sect, was actually in existence in the time of the Buddha, and that the Buddha was associated with those guys probably 4 out of the 6 years that he was wandering around before he got to Bodh Gaya. In fact, he was already in the Bodh Gaya area. That's where they were, up in that northern area. And so he was so good at it that everybody was marveling that this guy can do those austerities better than everybody else, just like he do the jhanas better than everybody else. But he recognized that those austerities also were not correct. But in fact, I think it's in Sutta number 101 is where he makes a very specific point. He comes back to talk to the monks about an encounter he had with these guys doing the austerities. Basically, in the sense of, well, why are you doing the austerities? Oh, because we already have perfect behavior now and are not creating any bad karma now.
Right.
But we still have to deal with the bad karma from the past. And so
Right.
we're accelerating the process by beating the hell out of ourselves, flagellating. And the Buddha says, well, why do you think that you have built up bad actions that have to be done from the past? And they says, well, they don't know. They just heard that from their teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And here these guys are beating themselves solidly day after day, hard times. I mean, if you've been in India, you know that there's this one guy that had a great big fish hook. And he would take that and run that push hook under one of his ribs out the other side so that he'd fish hook
Right.
himself. He would tie that fish hook to a limb of a tree, and he'd hang there by that fish hook.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird things happening like that with
All of
with
that
all this
stuff,
culture.
right? All of
but
that stuff.
but Dhammarato, I'm still
Okay, go
I
ahead.
kind of wanna look at because I've seen this sutta. I think it was maybe 112, and I kind of want to look it up where he talks that this didn't. He talks about his teachers, and he's saying that so under one teacher he got onto this one state, but then he realized that was not the end. Then he got to this next thing, and then he realized that was not the end. And only when he sat down, he went through them, and then he was like, okay. And then after going through these 8 stages, he realized, okay, well, now this is the end after reaching Nirvana. No, what am I missing here?
That. Well, one thing, you're not reading straight. You keep
Okay.
using the number 8.
Well, it doesn't. Yeah, but
There are only 4 jhanas. There are not 8. And the way that they counted up to 8, there are some of the sutras that have 9. But basically what we're talking about is something that you do with your mind when the mind is clear and focused, is that you can see how it operates.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to that is the phrase neither perception nor non-perception, which is often not understood as exactly what it means, okay? And then centuries later, they gave the analogy of a clay bowl that has been used for oil, like an old oil lamp. In the old days, you know, they would have little clay bowls and they'd put oil in it, and then a string would be in that oil and laying up on the side, and it would burn. It would have a little resting place on the oil pan or the clay oil thing. So when the bowl runs out of oil and it's empty and there's no oil left, still you can rub your finger or a cloth in that empty bowl and still get oil out of it. But the oil seeps right in to the clay bowl, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what we mean by neither. In other words, there's not enough perception or not enough oil to pour out of the bowl. You can't get any, but the bowl is still oily. And what that means is that we have to have a tiny bit of perception to be able to perceive that we are in fact conscious.
Right.
All right. But when that goes away, then there's nothing left. There's no input left because we're not able to perceive it. But most of the time, people are going around with a perception that's absolutely chock-a-block to the rim of oil, in the sense of thinking and turning and spinning and whatnot like that, and never coming to a conclusion. All right? And so in Sutta number 111...
Right. That's actually the one I was talking about, not 1112. It's 111. Yeah.
That, by the way, that one doesn't have 8. It's got 9 in it, because the last one is that at the end, when the perception ends, feelings end.
Cessation. Or...
Well, cessation is just a word. Okay. The word end is the same thing. But I guess that cessation is highfalutin Western Buddhist kind of language. Okay. Well, when perception is brought to an end, then feelings are brought to an end. Mm-hmm. Now that's about as far as we can go into it to understand that how the mind works. And this is all in the description of Paticca-Samuppada. Here's something that's very interesting, and that is that the jhanas and Paticca-Samuppada are directly related in the sense of Paticca-Samuppada in a way is that it stays theoretical for most students most of the time, because most of the students are still on the top part of it. From feeling comes grasping, comes clinging, comes becoming, and then into the woeful state, which is dukkha. Right. That's the states where most people stay. And that, in fact, even jhana dudes walking around still have to apply that higher part. It's only when the mind gets really quiet that we can begin to see how we create our existence, or we create
so this is the links
reality.
Of the dependent origination. Those are the first steps.
Right.
And the higher we go in these jhanas, in these states, the clearer.
The lower you go. Well, the higher in the jhana states you go, the deeper or the lower the numbers are in Paticca-Samuppada.
Right.
Okay, so the beginner is going to be working with feelings and feelings and feelings and feelings for a long time to learn to control those feelings without understanding how that control mechanism works. And it's basically from that position of uh, pasa, or contact. And what contacts us that gives us feelings is not what we perceive, it's the results of our perception, not consciousness. And the Pali word here is called salayatana. And in other suttas, like Sutta number 15 in the Dhamma Nikaya, it's referred to as internal sense perceptions, or sense. So there's an external sense, which is the eyes, the ears, all of that. And then there's an internal eye and ear. You can hum a tune in your mind because you've heard that tune through your ears and remembered it and bring it up and play it on a, let us say, a mental um, turntable or a mental CD player, right? There's that mental system in there, and that's called the Salayatana. And it's the Salayatana that contacts us and gives us feelings, not what we see, but what we make of it. And that a way of talking about it is that the scene is merely the scene, not processed. And the heard is merely the heard, not processed. And the cognized, or whatever comes into it, is not added to, it's just left. All right.
So it's like
Why?
this.
It's because we're not perceiving and coming up with something. All right. So, in the example is that you can hear, they had old games. And we did it in college with classical music. It's called Name That Tune. Okay, and so you hear that music, can you name that tune?
Right,
When you're naming that tune, you're no longer listening to the tune.
right.
Now the naming process is what we're talking about, and we live in the world of naming. Okay.
So the way I understood some of these other suttas is that the when we get down to these lower links of consciousnesses arising, it turns out that there's not actually one that they're all individual consciousness, right? The ear consciousness, the eye consciousness, these experiences are kind of arise one by one, and then is it kind of like when with this labeling process happens, that's when we move away from this
From
from the actual experience
reality
of consciousness
into our made
to
up
contact,
reality.
to feeling, to all those things, right?
Right. That we
Mhm.
don't live in an actual reality, we live in a perceived or made up reality.
Right.
And we make all of our choices because that's what contacts us, not the raw data. The raw data after it's processed is almost like the difference between um, text that you type into the computer, and once that's typed into the computer, then the computer can do all kinds of things with that text. But let us compare that to a piece of paper that has text written on it. A piece of paper that text is written on, the computer can't do anything about that. It's got to go through a several series of processes. One is you've got to scan it with a scanner and get an image file.
Mm.
And then you take OCR software that can go in and recognize character by character what's there, and then build the text from that image. Okay, that's what we do. We take an image and we build text out of it, and we talk to ourselves in that textual way. So I can say I can look out and see the tree, but the tree, the image of the tree, is not the image that you make up. When I say here in Thailand I see a tree, you, depends upon where you are and what kind of trees you've seen, most likely are thinking of or have the image of a different tree than the one that I'm seeing.
Right. So
I,
would you say that it would be this process that Buddha described just takes us down from the lamentation, suffering, and death and dukkha, and this the sort of unraveling of the mind, training of the mind gradually happens, where we're starting to perceive without labels, without scanning, like you said, scanning that text, scanning all these things. We're just basically going further and further down the chain until we start perceiving formations and all those other things, like we do in these higher jhanas, right? Is that what's happening?
Actually, no. It's better to understand how our past. That in fact, here's another point where the teaching of the Buddha is very difficult to understand, is because the translations are just so terrible.
Right.
They're terrible. The word sankara is often translated as concoctions, formations, other things like that, and that is completely misleading. Okay? A much better word to be translated is a pile of crap, an old pile of crap.
Right.
That's the correct way, because you see, concocting or forming means that it's got some kind of order to it, to where it's not ordered. Okay, the city dump is not ordered. Stuff gets all mixed together, just like our past does. It gets all mixed in there. It's a pile. That in fact, the phrase that is quite telling about this, so that people can understand it, is that everyone is an emperor of their own pile of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone's an emperor of their own pile of dirt. That pile of dirt is the sankara. And when we wallow in the past, we get filthy covered with it. And when we really wallow in it, we get buried under it. We're buried under the past, okay? So going back to this emperor, everyone is the emperor of his own pile of dirt, but almost everyone feels like that they are in fact the slave of their pile of dirt because they're buried under it. But that's an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other attitude of crawling out of it, and that's the kind of attitude that people go to psychologists or beginning meditators. They're having the idea that they're going to crawl out of it. All right, but the right attitude to develop immediately, right from the get-go, is I'm no longer buried in it. I'm on top of it now. I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm sitting on top of my own pile of crap. And that gives me quite a vista, because I've got quite a pile of crap I've been building up over 78 years. So I got a long vision, because I'm sitting on top of it and I can see. All right. So be careful when you use the word formations, because that is a completely wrong. It's almost, the word formations is like a library with a Dewey Decimal System, or the last name of the author is, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And the Dewey Decimal System has, I think that they've got a new one now, but in the old days, that's what they used.
Well, the sort of the analogy that resonated with me, or that, I don't know, maybe I came up with this whole process, links of dependent origination, is kind of like if we tend a garden, right? And the goal, can you hear me?
Yes.
And then basically the lamentation, the suffering, the birth, all these things, that would be like a big weed. And then the different stages of these links of dependent origination are just basically different stages of where we can tend the garden. We can tend the garden when we see a grass sprouting up, right? Or we can tend the garden, or we can tend and pull out this weed when we see that there's a bush sprouting up. Or if we get really, really, really good into seeing the soil and knowing where it is, we can actually see the soil and pick out the seeds as they get blown in there by the wind, right?
I understand that. Let me correct on this one point, and that is that in that way, the gardener is already an excellent gardener and knows what he's doing. And this may be just an old abandoned garden that he's cleaning up or starting a new garden, but he already knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. All right. Almost everybody is out in the field hoping for a garden, but don't have a clue about how to build one. And since those weeds are already so big, why not pull out grass instead?
Right.
All right. So that's the problem with that analogy.
So and
Is that
here the grass would be wholesome
whatever
thoughts
they want.
or
Well, no, 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 no. In this case, it's whatever they do rather than doing what they need to do.
okay.
All right, to take the easy way out. This is basically, I'm referring to the Vajrayana method of choiceless awareness. To just sit there and get run over by those big weeds.
Right.
To where the Mahayana is going around and naming and labeling and reporting and copying down every big weed he finds, and so he can go look it up in the dictionary, and you still got
Right.
all those weeds. When
Right.
really
Right.
all
Right.
we have to do is to every time we see one, pull it out, and it doesn't matter whether it's a blade of grass or full-blown weed. We just pull it out.
But okay, question on this one. So, yeah, you mentioned, well, we talked about jhanas a little bit, right? So then there's the sort of the lower jhanas, right? The rupa and then the arupa jhanas. Would it be so? At some point, we cannot perceive. You know, we're going beyond the feeling. We're going beyond the, you know, as we go deeper and deeper into these links of dependent origination,
I,
lower and lower.
I don't think that you will find in the various descriptions of the jhanas the word formless
Okay.
or rupa and arupa jhanas. That there are rupa arupa fetters, but there are
Mm.
no rupa arupa jhanas. I don't think so. Then, in fact, I challenge you to go find in the sutta where you can see, because you look like that you're playing with it. So keep that in mind. That if you can find a rupa jhana, then in
Okay.
fact the division is not there. The division is path and fruit.
Mm.
So when you begin to get the jhana, that's the path. And then the fruit of the jhana is when you've got it full blown. So the fruit of the first jhana becomes the path to the second jhana.
Right.
And then the path of the second jhana leads to the fruit of the second jhana. And then the fruit of the second jhana leads to the path of the third jhana. These things are actually different. Especially notable is the second jhana. The
Yeah.
path of
Why is that important? You mentioned that yeah, after you emerge from the second jhana, the you know the suffering kicks back in a little bit,
no,
or the
no,
hindrances arise. That's what you're saying.
no. When the second jhana, see, the fruit of the first jhana is wholesome thought after wholesome thought after wholesome thought after wholesome thought. That's the fruit of the
Mm.
first jhana. Okay, and then that becomes also a spacious. So what I mean by that is wholesome thoughts that are separated by emptiness. So you'll have a wholesome thought and then nothing, and then another wholesome thought and then nothing. All right, and then to go from the path of from the fruit of the first jhana to where we have space between the wholesome thoughts, into having long spaces between the wholesome thoughts is now the path of the second jhana.
Okay.
Okay, and the and that long space between the thoughts is because we're paying attention to how good we feel, how marvelous we feel. This is why piti becomes the object of the second jhana, is we feel
Mm.
so good we don't have to tell ourselves how good we feel anymore. We're too busy feeling good to tell ourselves how good we feel.
Right.
Okay, so that's then the fruit of the second jhana.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but rupa and arupa jhanas, I don't know. I hear that. That's pretty Western Buddhism, but I don't know of anybody who actually understands what they're talking about there.
What about
Specifically,
what? Okay.
specifically because the guys who come up with the number 8
Well,
are the ones who put those 5, 6, 7, and 8 as the arupa jhanas and the first 4 jhanas as the rupa jhanas, except that um, the way that the Pali should be understood is the way that is actually understood is that there's a full description of the first jhana, a pretty good description with similes in both the first and the second jhana, good similes for the and stuff about the third, and then when the fourth jhana they have the simile, but then they leave it there and then go off into the arupa stuff. And the reality is that all of that stuff is part of the fourth jhana. There are not 8 jhanas. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, and the fourth jhana is when the mind gets so good at it that it can see the 5, 6, 7, and 8. But the 5, 6, 7,
Yeah.
and 8 are observations to be done once the mind is ready to do those observations. But Westerners who talk about 8 jhanas obviously don't know what they're talking about, especially the teachers who make a whole lot of money by teaching jhanas. The Western dudes, never been ordained, read everything out of a book, and now they're making money off of all those students who can't do what their
Sure.
guys are teaching. Won't name names here, but that's the situation.
Dhammarato, there was a brilliant and very brilliant description of the first 2 jhanas. What happens afterwards? So we have then these long
The
spaces
first
between
jhana.
wholesome thoughts.
And what happens after the first jhana? The first jhana. And what happens after the third first jhana is the fourth first jhana. Think of it as that's the goal. Then in Sutta number 36, the Buddha actually specifies that. It's under the story of the rose apple tree. You probably heard the word rose apple tree in this meaning, okay? That while he was a young man or a young kid, probably about 14 to 16, something like that, he was sitting under the rose apple tree, and quite naturally, see, he had already been practicing jhanas. In those days, when he was a kid, he knew what jhana was. That in fact he had a teacher. There's a long history about this guy, Kanda, who was the one who gave the fortune telling at the Buddha's birth. All the other Brahmins and fortune tellers said, oh, he's going to be a wheel turning monarch. He's going to be an emperor. He's going to be a really big, powerful soldier dude. Okay. Which, if that was the case, then his dad was obviously had gone down that path, which meant that he gave him all the training that he needed. Training horses, training elephants, archery, swordsmanship, all of that kind of stuff. He was field trained, and yet the Westerners have this belief that he was cloistered somehow. He was not possibly cloistered. No, but there was another guy there at that ceremony where the king was asking what's this child's future is going to be. The guy's name was Kanda, and he says, "Oh, he is going to become a world turning Buddha, or a wheel turning enlightened one, or someone like that." I don't remember exactly. This guy then was hired by the Sukadama, his dad, to be his tutor for the rest of his life. This was a Brahmin scholar. And so the Buddha in his young life learned all of the stuff. He almost memorized, or I guess he could have said that he memorized the Vedas and the Upanishads and all of that kind of stuff, as well as learning to practice. And he already knew about jhanas, but he had given that up because it wasn't the relief from suffering. And so now he is crawling out of the creek after having gotten so ill and so sick and so starved because he was such a good practitioner of the austerities. And he had now gone both extremes. He'd gone as far into the jhanas and as far into austerities as he could possibly go, further than anybody else. And both of them were wrong. And he says, oh, there's got to be a middle path. And so this is what the middle path is all about, is that he says, I reflect and remember that I was sitting under the rose apple tree and was experiencing first jhana. And then he had the thought, why am I afraid of the sensual pleasures of first jhana? That in fact the pleasures of first jhana are not the same pleasures as going to the brothel.
Mm.
And then he says that the path of enlightenment indeed is the first jhana. If you don't mind, I'll look it up and I'll read it to you because I know exactly
Yeah,
where.
yes, please. That's very insightful.
Okay, this is my copy of the Majjhima Nikaya.
Yeah, nice. Seen some good times.
Exactly so. Now, the first part of this sutta is about the austerities. Here we go. I recall that when my father, the Sakyan, was occupied while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, quite secluded from the sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. That's the hindrances there. And secluded from sensual pleasures have to do with greed and desire for sex and getting drunk and all of that kind of stuff. So that's the word for sensual pleasures. Secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with the piti and the sukha. What is referred to here as rapture and pleasure, this born of being secluded from the hindrances. Could that be the path to enlightenment? Then following upon that memory came the realization, the first jhana, this is the path to enlightenment. I thought, why am I afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? This is a big insight for the Buddha right here. This is it. Why am I afraid of the pleasures that have nothing to do with the sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? I thought, I am not afraid of that pleasure since it has nothing to do with the sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. And then he decided that it's not easy to attain that pleasure of the first jhana with a body so excessively emaciated. And so he started eating food, and immediately, I mean, if he was really emaciated and he started eating food immediately, his body is going to start to refresh. And his buddies, when they saw that he had given up that austerities, they walked out on him because he'd gotten fat. Now, not obese. He had just gotten some of the flesh back that he had wasted away. But that put him back in the state so that now that he's healthy enough that he can actually go back and practice the jhanas. Okay. So hear it very clearly, without a doubt. He does not talk about the jhanas are the way to enlightenment. He says the first jhana is the path to enlightenment. What does that mean? It means why should somebody sit and spend a whole lot of time into the fourth jhana and then be afraid to come out into the world? I've seen guys like that, especially in Burma, to where they only do two things. They go for Pindabat, they go to the toilet. And other than that, they're sitting in the meditation hall, even if they're asleep. They still are sitting there in the meditation hall, right? Because why? Because they go back into ordinary existence when they come out of those states, because they haven't fully established the first jhana. Right. So you could actually talk about the first jhana as traveling money. You don't go out in the world without your traveling money.
So you have to have first jhana is everything. That's kind of the base for any other possibility, and that needs to be established.
Right.
And then the other example that you made with that we should always be landing our airplane at the airport, and the airport is the first jhana. Is that can you talk a little bit more about that, because there's something there, and I really resonate with it.
Basically, it's all about being free from unwholesome thoughts, being free from hindrances. This is what it's really all about. Because once you're free from the hindrances, once you're talking yourself not into feeling bad and giving yourself problems and worries and whatnot like that, but you're actually using wholesome thoughts. The kind of wholesome thoughts that we're going to have are going to be happy, relaxing thoughts. Instead of the job that has to be done, we're now having thoughts of how marvelous it is that the work is done. And that the work to do, the actual work that we need to do, is the same thing as the right noble effort. The work that we need to do is to remove the hindrances, to come out of the unwholesome thoughts.
And they do this by gladdening the mind, by generating the sukha, by just...
you don't generate it, you talk yourself into it. Okay? Right. You don't generate it. And also there's an important point. It has to do with the way that the sutta is structured, is that the gladdening of the mind is not just changing the thoughts. The gladdening of the mind means that we're changing our attitude. We're changing the mind states. We're investigating the states of mind that, in fact, when the Sambhojana, the 7 factors of enlightenment are described, it's talking about unremitting investigation of the states of mind. Okay? How am I feeling? How am I doing? Is the mind exalted? Is it tired? Is it bright? Is it effective? Can you see clearly? So these are and the best part about it is that do I have the right attitude? The state of mind and the attitude are basically the same thing. So if you have an attitude of being tired, you feel tired. If you have the attitude of being on top of the world, then you have the state of mind that you're on top of the world, and you begin to have the feelings of being on top of the world.
Right.
All right. So they're interrelated. That in fact, the state, what they call steps. It's a bad thing to call those things steps, but let us say the list item number 6, 7, and 8 rather, is about looking at how these things are interrelated. They use the word conditioning, okay? So the feelings condition the mind conditions the feelings condition the body conditions the feelings condition the mind conditions the body. Those things are all interrelated. We can't pull feelings out and set it over there.
Right.
We can't put the mind out and set it over there and take the body and put it yonder. These things are interrelated, but we don't think of it like that.
Yeah, that's very insightful.
For example, when somebody says how you're feeling, and we say, oh, my toe hurts. Well, he didn't ask about how your body is doing. Are you well? No, my toe hurts. How are you feeling? Is I don't like my toe hurts. That's how I feel, that I don't like it. So the toe hurting or the sensations of the toe is body. And that conditions the feelings, I don't like pain. All right. That in fact, the changing of the word from sensation to pain means that we've changed it now from a body sensation into a feeling. I don't like it.
So we're basically going up the steps on this dependent origination, right? So, and then from feeling, we have clinging, we have all this other stuff that leads to worse and worse.
Exactly. That's the step by. This is why it's called dependent origination, or things get started from a cause, is what the word paticca samuppada translates to, but they've got it in such stilted language. I mean, this is ridiculous to call it paticca samuppada, to call it dependent origination. I mean, that is university language.
Yeah.
And we need to teach this. Okay, so nothing happens without a cause.
Right.
This is what it actually means. Dependent origination is hard to understand, but it's very simple concept. And that is the water doesn't come out of the tap until you turn the tap. Well, water may not come out of the tap when you turn the tap because the motor that pumps the water is broken. And that's a condition for water moving through the pipe.
Right.
Okay. So there are many conditions. And conditioning is not the same word as cause. So when we have cause and effect, the word cause here would be best to call it conditions.
Right.
An example of that is that having sex is not the cause for the baby. Okay, there's a huge bunch of conditions that happen, and one of the conditionings is that it had sex. The other one is after the sex it became fertile, or that there was the egg and the sperm fertilized together. And then there's other causes in the sense that the egg starts to grow in place. It doesn't get dislodged out of the uterus, right? And
Right.
then many, 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 many hundreds and thousands of causes later, at the end of 9 months, the baby is born. But you can't say that the baby was born because she had sex. You can say that she was conditioned to have a baby. But there
Right.
was a whole lot of other conditions in there. And this is an important point because there's not one root or single cause. That is a set of conditions.
So would that be yeah, you mentioned that the path is actually very, very simple. Would that be accurate to say that all we're trying to do is we're trying to set the conditions for
Okay, right.
for something, right? We try, I mean, gladdening
We're,
of the mind, wholesome thought. You know, all we're doing essentially is we're just setting the conditions.
yes,
We're setting the conditions for something to potentially,
to set a
yeah,
new condition. And we do
yeah,
that in order to set, yes, another condition. And the conditioning here is actually the removal of the conditioning so that we can go back to a natural state rather than
right.
being all conditioned up.
Wow, yeah. I
So
feel
we're
like
actually
I'm
beginning to remove the conditions,
right,
okay?
right,
And so we live our lives completely conditioned by our unwholesome thoughts. We talk ourselves into feeling bad. We talked ourselves into feeling bad because we heard mommy talk us into feeling bad. Do your
right.
homework.
Yeah,
Eat your spinach before you have dessert. Well, so all of that conditioning language, we pick that up, and then we continue to criticize ourselves, just like we were criticized when we were kids.
right,
If mommy had stayed nurturing, 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 and never gave any criticism, the kid's going to wind up being a sociopath because he doesn't care about anybody. He doesn't understand suffering, and any suffering that he does have is always somebody else's fault. So there's a middle path someplace in there to where
mhm,
we have to teach the kids to learn to get along with others. And in fact, that's the biggest problem of the unlearned lesson. The primary unlearned lesson of humanity is a lesson that we should be taught in childhood, and that is to get along with each other.
right, 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 right.
And I mean, if Putin and Zelensky could get along with each other, then there would be no war.
Sure.
So that's the whole point is that we first learn to not get along with others, to have conflict with others, and then we learn to take that conflict inside,
But
and
then
we
we can
have those
transcend it,
conflicts.
right?
Pardon?
So my understanding of the hindrances is so a child who's never been, I don't know, beaten with a stick is very happy, while you know, or for example, a child has never gotten angry, or there's somebody there who's just never encountered a situation where anger is possible just because everything's been nice, somebody's never been physically assaulted or whatever, and that's very different from so this child and this sort of hindrance of these negative emotions. um, he's not free of them because he's not free of the possibility of them arising in the future, right?
Hmm.
Whereas somebody who has been angry and knows this thing and then becomes free from them, now he's actually free from that hindrance. um,
Only when he can see the hindrances.
right, right, and
In
then
in
but in
in
order
the
to see the
regard,
hindrances.
well, wait a minute, let me finish. that means then that we have to also be able to see the conditioning of the mind so that we can see how we feel. That in fact, when someone is angry, almost always they will deny that they're angry. Anger is something that is hard to see, but it
Sure.
was a conditioning. There was a lot of conditioning going on that brings up the anger. Basically, in all cases, anger has an underlying quality of fear, fear of loss. We get angry when we find out that something is missing.
Right.
But the reality is that I don't like it because I've lost something. So I fear that I can't do without it, that
Right.
I'll get stuck on something. Like looking for things. Here's a point. Tam is excellent at finding things. She's really, really good at it. I've marveled at how good she is at finding things around the house. And I rarely want to ask her. I want to go look for myself. And sometimes I can't find something. And I'll ask her, have you seen that? Blah, blah. And she says, yeah, it's right over there. Why don't you look? Well, she doesn't say, why don't you look? I'm the one who's saying, why didn't I see it? Right? Okay. So this is the way we have to investigate these states of mind. We have to investigate and find that there is anger there. We can only change the anger once we see it. We can only
Right.
change the hindrance or the unwholesome thought once we see it as unwholesome.
Right.
And that I used to have a list, but I've kind of lost track of it, of the phrases that would be either wholesome or not wholesome,
Mhm.
depending upon the circumstances and the feelings, etc., like that, not on the words themselves. It's not the
Mhm.
words themselves that are unwholesome. It's kind of the way that we think about them.
It's like a symptom.
Uh-huh. Like,
Yeah.
here's an example of that. My mother died. Versus my mother died.
Right.
You see the different reaction. All right. So the words themselves don't determine it, it's how we feel.
Right.
Or mother died. Yeah, but that was a long time ago. You know. All
Right.
right. So it has so the thoughts then will determine our feelings, but only in a certain way. But basically, it's the state of mind that we're in that conditions the feelings.
Right.
But the state of mind also brings up the thoughts. So when we're talking about changing the thoughts from unwholesome to wholesome, that's in one sutta, but in the other sutta, in the Anapanasati Sutta, it talks about gladdening the mind. But that's not language, that's the state of mind that we're changing. We're actually changing the mind itself, not the thoughts that are in the mind.
Right.
So this is why there are four in the Satipatthana. There's a major difference between the state of mind and the contents of the mind. But
Right.
the state of the mind will generally determine what the contents of the mind are because it flavors it. All right. But here we are intentionally and consciously changing what we're saying because the intention is to also change the attitude or change the mind state. And then that goes full blown when we get the confidence or the samasankappa. We can use various words in English to get what we're talking about. Get your mojo, right? That in fact the Pali word has mojo in it. I've forgotten the reference, but the word mojo is actually in the Pali. It's a word in the
Really?
Pali, and
That's
it
cool.
means the same thing. So
Uh,
get your mojo going.
get
Get
your mojo.
yeah, get your attitude. You know,
Yeah.
get get your mind bright. So this is a
That
state of
makes
mind.
makes makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so this is what we're doing is that we're changing the old um, underdog, the loser, the child, the dependent, the victim mentality. And we're changing that slowly, one thought at a time, one mind moment at a time, of changing and brightening the mind so that we begin to feel like that there is nothing to fear, that we
Right.
feel safe and secure and comfortable. And that leads to satisfaction, which eventually leads to the feeling of success. And then that is topped off from the feeling of success into the feeling of wealth. So think of the analogy of filling a bucket. All right. The filling of the bucket is the bucket's empty. I'm a victim. It may have a little bit of water in it, but I'm still the victim. But you keep putting more and more water, and pretty soon the bucket is half full and it's getting heavy now. Okay. And that gives us the attitude, I can do this. When the bucket's empty, we don't have the attitude, I can fill this thing up. We have the attitude of the bucket's empty. Oh, I've got to go fill it as the bucket's empty, but it's always the loser's mentality.
Right.
Once the bucket is about half full, now we're changing the attitude of, oh, I can fill this bucket. I know how to do it now. I've gotten it half full. I'm on the way. And this is an important point. But then what happens when the bucket gets absolutely full and we're still putting water in it? And the bucket overflows. And every time we pour more water into that bucket, it just spills out all over the place. That's what we call wealth. And that's where
when real metta can actually
that
come out.
you're ahead of me, one statement ahead of me. Right, exactly. All right.
Yeah.
So the way that metta is taught is take a little of the water out of your almost empty bucket and give it to somebody else. Don't work. Or take your empty bucket and give some water to somebody else out of that empty bucket. And that's where most people are practicing metta. Doesn't mean a thing. It's just words that they don't even believe. May all beings be happy. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing.
Right.
That in fact, it also, the all beings quality feeds into the Western mentality about the world. We see the world. There's actually several different definitions of the world. One, the word for world would be the planet Earth. Well, guess what? The planet Earth would be a whole lot better off without humans. You could say that humans have given the Earth a really bad skin rash.
Yeah.
Really bad skin rash. Pollution's in the ocean. Mining that cuts mountains off, leaving a desert. And in fact, we can tell now that all of the Middle East is a desert because humanity cut the trees down over the hundreds and thousands of years. They used to, the cedars of Lebanon are in the Bible. Okay, the cedars of Lebanon. Guess what? Lebanon don't have no cedars anymore. They were cut down before the Bible was even finished. So humans have done this. So the next one is the world in the sense of a big, wide, wonderful world that we can travel on. It's like the planet Earth, but now the world is different in the sense that we're looking and inspecting at the world in a detail. The next version of the word world is human society. All right, because when we think about the world, normally we're thinking about other people. We're not thinking about the Grand Canyon when we think of the world. We're thinking about San Francisco instead, human place, all right?
Right.
And then there's the other version of the word world, which is the one that we're going to work with. And that is the world is the world of your senses. It's the world that you live in. That right now, for both of us, the Grand Canyon is only a concept. We think it's the world, but it's not. It's just a mental concept. And San Francisco is just a mental concept. That in fact, the place San Francisco I hear is nothing like the San Francisco that I have as a concept. Because the last time I was in San Francisco was like 30 years ago, and it's not the same place anymore. All right. Different. But it's still just a concept. But this porch is real. The dogs are real. So when I say may all beings be happy, I'm talking about 3 or 4 people and 2 or 3 dogs. That's my world. All right. So the world is as far as you can see. And right here, I can see about 50, 60 meters. That's it. The things that I hear in my world are because there's some road noise out at the road, or because they're having some celebration at the Watt, or maybe from time to time they play the music too loud in one of the bars. But the bar, other than the fact that sometimes I can hear their loud music pumping in the night, that bar doesn't exist. It's not in my world. I don't even know where it is. I can hear the noise drifting into my world. Okay. This is why we want to think that way for metta, because you cannot wish metta on people you don't know, because you're only wishing metta to concepts in your own mind. That real metta is real with real people. So when mom comes up on the porch, now she's part of my world and I can give her metta. But when she gets in the car and goes off, she's gone. She's not in my world. No metta there.
Right.
This
Right.
is
I understand.
oh good. All right. So once
Yeah.
we understand and pin down what the world actually is, we can in fact live within our world, the world of our senses. This is very, very important part about the Paticca Samuppada of
Mhm.
consciousness is sense consciousness. That's the world. But when we add concepts to it in the perception, our perception of the world then dirties our actual understanding of the world.
Sure.
And so I can sit here and marvel at the world that I'm in, or I can think about how bad San Francisco has gotten, and now how do I feel?
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah. That's.
uh,
I see a lot of that.
okay. Well, we're actually now talking about step 3, 4, 5, and 6 of Paticca Samuppada. And what we need to do is stop conditioning and leave things alone in a natural way. But we can't do that because we're already trained to mess with stuff.
Mm.
So we have to learn to stop messing. That's the hindrances. Stop messing with stuff and leave it alone. That's all the job there is to do. If we think it's broken, then we go to fix it, which means now we're messing with it, and that's dukkha. If we just understand that there's no problem there, then there's nothing to do, and that's sukha. The
Right.
exact phrase in English, the old phrase is, leave a sleeping dog lie. If you kick that dog, he'll start biting at you. So you just leave him alone. So that if that's the case, then why don't we leave all of those thoughts alone and start brightening and gladdening the mind? Well, I'm so glad that I can be here now, rather than having to deal with all the problems of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And all the problems of the world are just merely my own concepts.
Right.
Like
Dhammarato,
what?
thank you. That's extremely. I have so much to digest. I feel like I want to sit on all of this before I try to put all of this other stuff in my mind as well. But there was just very insightful
Okay.
moments
Well,
there.
let's spend 5 more minutes now and stop with all of the theoretical stuff, and let's figure out how to practice. Because the practice of this is very simple. And that is, number one, we have to remember to look at what we're thinking. Then
Right.
we have to look at what we're thinking with the discernment. Is this thought worth having or not? Or another way of saying it, can I improve this thought? Can I improve it? Can I gladden the mind? And the answer is, of course, yes. And so that's the practice. Remembering to look and to make a change.
Mm.
Remember to look and to make a change, and then congratulate ourselves. That's the Sammasankappa. And if you
Mm.
keep congratulating yourselves, you become the lion. You become the winner. You become the guy on top of his own pile of crap, his own pile of dirt, because we have the attitude now that that's just an old pile of dirt I'm sitting on. But it gives me height so that I can see. But I don't deep, deep dig into it. That's what we are almost doing is that these conceptualizations are always the digging in the past. And getting on top of the world means now that we can see the reality rather than digging our way through our own dirt. Over and over again, coming out of those hindrances, one at a time, every thought that we have, oh, that thought can be improved. Now, here's something. What if you have a thought that couldn't be improved? Wow, must be a really marvelous thought that we're having. Congratulations. So we actually can improve a thought that can be improved by congratulating ourselves for having that thought. And so any thought that we have can be improved. Okay, so practice that. Whatever you're thinking now, I can do better than this.
Yeah, no, that's really good, and that's really simple, and that's really nice.
It's a very simple thing. So here's one example of that. I'm sitting here thinking about the argument that I had with Aunt Susie yesterday. And then I wake up and I look and I say, wait a minute, Susie's not here. I don't have to argue with Susie right now. Wow, what a relief. I can just forget all about her. That's how we do it. That's it. I don't have to think about that. I can sit here and just relax. And we keep practicing that over and over and over and over and over again. And pretty soon we learn how to relax pretty well.
Great. Thank you.
Never mind, start again. And almost everything that I teach comes out of Sutta number 117, number 118, and number 119. They're all right there in a row, with others like 111. So that group of 10, from the 110 to 120, is rich.
Check them out.
All right. We'll see you later, Andrey.
All right. Thank you so much.
I hope to see you soon. Practice well.
Soon.
Enjoy.
Will do. I'm going on a retreat on Monday, so I'll be gone for 10 days. But I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for telling me. Where are you going to go?
Leh in Ladakh. It's at an altitude of 12,000 feet in the Himalayas. It's a little city there.
Well, breathe well. Breathe well. Yeah. The air is thin.
The air is very thin there. But it's going to be nice. Yeah,
what kind of retreat is it, or who's running it?
Well, actually, yeah, it is the TWIM tradition, right? So it is kind of based on the earliest suttas. Just a very very basic anapanasati meditation or metta meditation.
Okay. Good.
And nothing much to it. So,
what does the word TWIM mean?
That's Bhante Vimala Ramsey's approach to it. Tranquil wisdom, insight, meditation. It's all about just gladdening the mind, and relaxing. Mm-hmm. So, sounds pretty good.
When metta is practiced correctly, it is step 10 of anapanasati, gladdening the mind.
Yeah.
But the way it's taught, that almost never happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think our conversation today really makes some things clear of the right practice and maybe what's not the wrong practice. So we shall see. Excellent. But anyways, 10 days in silence is going to be very nice.
Go enjoy it. Make it nice. People go to them thinking it's going to be nice, like you said, and they wind up, it's not. It's hard. All right, so take the hardness out of it and always remember, this is nice, and keep remaining that way. This is good. This is nice. Yeah, no place to go and nothing to do, and I can sit here at 12,000 feet and breathe deeply.
Yeah, I have to.
All right, Andrew, we'll see you.
All right. Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.